and it'll be on local knowledge, working in the Middle East and Asia, complications, quality, and stability in those areas. The moderator is Lane Anderson with Structure Tone, and we have representatives from 451 Planning Advisors, Critical Project Services, and Fidelity Investments.
Thank you, Mike. Can you guys hear me okay? Yeah. Sounds good. So our topic that we're talking is Middle East, really design, construction, implementation of data centers. So we're going to be having discussion topics of a number of topics. Feel free to not wait to the end. If you have a question, raise your hand or speak out. There's no need to wait all the way to the end if there's something that's germane to the topic. So our first topic that we wanted to, well, let me let you guys introduce yourselves first. I'm sorry, Matt.
Matthew Koerner with Critical Project Services. We do project and program management for the mission critical industry.
Mike Lewis, Fidelity Investments, real estate side of the house.
Steve Carter with the 451 Planning Advisors, part of the 451 Research Group. We advise clients probably $2 billion in revenue and above all over the world on data center choices, build, buy, colo, lease, cloud in those environments. So.
Great. And myself, Lane Anderson, I run our mission critical practice, really somewhat west of the Mississippi. We have offices, a number of offices nationwide, of course, but internationally in China, UK, a number of other places. So it's germane to our discussion today. So our first topic that we wanted to touch on was really design differences in the U.S. versus Middle East, really as a broad topic. Matt, you want to touch on some of the projects you've seen that?
Yeah. Some of the big design differences that we've seen, and one of the things that we talked about was design credentials with the different groups that we see here in the U.S. versus the Middle East. One of the trends that we've been seeing here in the U.S. is, green data centers and building toward green practices, whether that's
right.
LEED or practices outlined by the Green Grid, is very popular. But what we're seeing is a lot of our clients are saying, we want to design to meet the goals of LEED Gold or LEED Silver, but don't really feel the need to register the project, or we want to design to meet the requirements of Uptime Institute Tier 3, but actually getting that recognition isn't as important. What we're seeing in the Middle East and in Asia is that those credentials are very important. Having that piece of paper that says somebody else has certified our design or our project as Tier 3 or a Class B data center or as a LEED Silver project is very important. And that also translates to when we hire contractors and engineers and architects. Often we'll get a portfolio of projects that they've done, but it's preceded with, here's my Class A fire protection engineer's licensure that's been chopped by the local authorities, or this is my Class B structural engineering certificate, or even my blue ribbon from the spelling bee I won in the fourth grade. Right. Having some sort of a certification or an achievement is very, very important.
That's good. What about yourself?
So, majority of my experience has been in India, and in India, dealing with either data centers or call centers, mainly call centers, we have to work with developers to pick a location, work with the developers to build out or fit out the buildings. So one of the design criteria I'm looking at is a good developer who has a good building, who's able to work with me to help fit out that building. Also, as I go into that building within India, I realize that electrical infrastructure is not as strong or as robust as the United States, and it's very unreliable. So one of my criteria from the beginning is I'm going to have power to this call center 24 hours a day, and I'll have to design it just like a data center, which means a N+1 generator system. I'm placing UPS power out to all the desktops to ensure it's powered even during the worst days of the utility grid. With regard to the air conditioning in the building, water is very scarce, and then what water you can get is not very clean. So a large majority of the air conditioning equipment are chillers or air-cooled chillers. So that's not helping my efficiency, but it is going to ensure business continuity.
Interesting. What about yourself, Steve?
Sure. So if part of full disclosure, the Uptime Institute is part of the 451 group, so it's one of our sister companies. I worked for the Uptime Institute for 2 years. The first 2 years I was here with the 451 group. So with that, just echoing some of those
Sure.
comments, is that we are seeing tremendous, especially in the Mideast. What are those certifications? And certainly Uptime Institute doesn't think we're the only certification out there that's important, but as far as that goes, we are seeing explosive business in that area. There is a really strong desire. Just my opinion of what's driving some of that is there is a desire to be on parallel with some of the more mature data center industries, like in North America and in Europe.
Correct.
And I think they're going after those certifications because they want to be demonstrating to the world that they can meet anybody's standards out there, and that they can highlight those standards. And we're also seeing the same thing happening. We're talking about Asia as well,
Right.
Asia, but Mideast is just extremely active in those areas. Two things: building data centers, as well as getting all types of certifications and processes around that. So from the design side, we're also seeing, again, talking about the SMU Law School of Engineering, we're seeing a lot of activity of people going through trying to get training from the design side, like the training on how to meet certification processes, in our case Uptime, but others as well out there.
Right.
As well. So there is a real strong hunger. And lastly, there is a strong desire to understand our experience and our capabilities, but fulfilled locally with
Right.
putting local people to work, of course. And we have to be sensitive to that culture. Is they want to understand that. I think almost all of these regions of the world, especially Asia and Mideast, are looking to Europe and the U.S. for expertise,
Right.
but obviously trying to pull that in and grow that locally, which is the only way they actually sustain that industry. So,
Have any of you guys seen any, from the tidal surge, some of the obviously the flood events that happen, or have you seen any of those things affect any of your projects? I know we have in Hong Kong a number of projects at significant cost and elevation change, obviously. Have you guys been seeing any of those fallout, if you will?
No, I have not. Not in India. We have not been affected.
We haven't either. I mean, for the most part, as long as you do the proper due diligence on the site,
Right.
you don't run into that down the road.
Sounds good. So our next topic, anybody have any questions regarding that aspect? Our next topic was really a quality discussion. I know we've heard that in a number of different discussions thus to date. Mike, you want to maybe start with that one? Any quality aspects from either design, quality, or construction, et cetera?
It's definitely different in India. You go in and first of all, when you take a look at the environment where the offices are located, you definitely have to change your mindset. You're working with a developer, so they're bringing in local tradespeople to install partitions, walls, infrastructure. A large majority of the walls related to the critical rooms will be brick and mortar. Very few components will be sheetrock and metal studs. That's just due to the humidity within the area. You're going to see very few conduit runs. They do not use conduit. It's going to be more of MC cable. It's going to be run on the outside of the concrete block walls where it's within a protected area. With regard to just the quality, people working on a job site, don't be surprised with regard to safety issues. There's no Department of Labor, there's no OSHA. Your unskilled labor will be women, it will be young kids, above 16 or 18 years age. And these would be the people who are doing the heavy backbreaking work. They're going to be toting the bricks, the mortar, the sand. Your skilled labor, these would be the people laying the blocks, laying the mortar. When you actually see a person who is very well educated, very well skilled, these would be the people working for Caterpillar, Cummins, Liebert, coming in to actually install the equipment, doing the final connection work. So it's definitely something to get used to. I take the NEC, but I don't use it verbatim. I use it as a thinking compliance document.
Mm-hmm. What about yourself, Steve? Any thoughts regarding that?
well, just a lot of experience here recently in Russia over the last year and a half or so, just using that as an example.
Right.
A country that is working to begin to, especially let's just say around the Moscow area quite a bit, working to implement data centers much like what we see in Europe, working very hard to come to that level, having to import a lot of those skills still, but it's building inside of the country.
Correct.
It's actually building inside the country. So, you know, the quality of the construction there, if those skills are brought in place and you can get the political clarity and the political okay to use as much local labor as possible, as well as bringing in some of those skill sets, the quality of construction has been quite high, actually.
That's good.
It's the thing about Russia is they're trying to become more like the EU, you know, the EU than India. They're a little further. They're further along in that area. Of course, very smart, sophisticated people there. So
Right.
It's becoming more and more like the EU compared to in India. India is still. From all the projects, I haven't personally worked there. I've worked with a lot of people who work in that area. So, you know, just a little bit of difference. And then, of course, if we get into Asia, it's a whole different world itself. So.
Sounds good. Matt, any
Yeah.
perspectives? I know you've been there quite a bit.
Yeah, one of the things that we have to be conscious of when we work, especially in places like India or Africa, is to design to the skill level of the local workforce.
Right.
It's not very cost effective to take an entire construction crew from the U.S. or from Europe and build a data center, especially if it's a large scale data center
Right.
in another country. But you've got to be able to balance the redundancy and resiliency requirements of your data center with the ability of the local workforce and the, you know, what you can get locally as well from a material standpoint. You know, I know one of the things that was mentioned in an earlier panel was conduit.
Right.
So I know that working in Asia or the Middle East, it would look great to put in, you know, an elaborate conduit system and make it look like a data center here,
Right.
and
You're just
protection
not
would
gonna
be
get
there.
that.
Yeah, I mean, everything is run in cable trays, and sometimes those cable trays are made out of sheet metal that's been on site,
Right.
and, you know, you've got jagged edges, and pulling conductors through there is not the
Right.
most effective thing, but it's what they know, and you're probably going to end up with a higher quality product that way than if you force somebody to do something that's outside of their
Right.
element. So it's a balancing point that you have to take into consideration.
Right. So have you had to kind of pick your battles, what's important versus what's not? So
That's-
maybe that drywall that's not perfect,
That's a really good
let's
way
not
to-
fall on the sword on that.
That's a really good way to put it. I mean, I know that going over there and representing my client,
Right.
you know, typically they want a Western quality data center, but I also have to be conscious of the ability of the contractors that we're hiring and the budget that my client has given me.
Right.
So, you know, I do want to give them a
Right.
really good product, but I also have to keep in mind what the local labor force is capable of doing.
You know, something we found is that there's different levels of the same trades, and you're going to pay that premium for the material or those trades, and they're much sought after. So,
Yep.
you know, I don't know if you guys have seen the same things. Any questions on that area before we move to the next? So the next topic was
You have
really,
Hey,
yeah. Go ahead.
Just have one quick one. Matt, when you said design to the skilled labor of the workforce, that's on the construction side. Do you see, is the operations workforce there educated enough in these areas to handle the sophisticated failover techniques and that type of, when you're looking at tier 4 and multiple levels of redundancy, is their skill level on par with what we see in Western Europe and the US?
It's a good question, and in a lot of cases, it's not. You know, I've had a lot of experience over the last couple of years in mainland China, and China is seeing explosive growth in the data center market. I mean, they've got 1.4 billion people that now have access to mobile data and everything else that goes with it. And so the amount of data centers that they're building are huge. Take with that a very limited workforce that understands the operation of a data center, getting spread more and more thin. They're typically, what we're seeing is, you know, a company like JLL or CBRE will bring in somebody for a site out of Europe or the United States to kind of run that and train the local people, the local folks on how to operate that facility. There is a very, very small sector that understands how to operate a tier 3 or a tier 4 environment over there.
Good question, Joe.
Just as an aside to that, the Irish are huge about, it's interesting where some of those pockets of capabilities, the Irish are really, really big for data center in the market. And I run into them more than you may think in some of these markets, maybe not but all the people building all the data centers in Moscow are Irish companies.
Maybe
So-
they're just easier to pick out.
No, I'm talking to the people who, we were asking who actually came over to do this. So,
Right.
so just letting you know some of your global competitors, if you're in the data center services business, the Irish are marketing their skills globally on a huge basis, including from the government level all the way down to local companies. So.
That's interesting, Steve. Any other questions regarding that? So it somewhat goes into the same discussion, but the people side. I know we've all commented previously, but I think the importance of the quality of the teams. Matt, I don't know if you want to maybe pick that one up first.
Yeah, it can be difficult. I know one of the things that was said earlier as well was you deal with a bunch of liars.
Yeah.
I
We know some of those guys, right?
Yeah, I wouldn't outright call them liars, but people that really want to be something that they're not.
Right,
So,
right.
you really have to be able to weed out a guy that wants to be able to build a data center
Right.
versus somebody that really understands how to build a data center.
Right.
And in a lot of cultures that I've dealt with, in Asia especially, telling somebody no is not necessarily an acceptable answer if you want to save face. And so, people will tell you, yes, I understand, yes, I know how to do that, when in actuality they don't.
They don't,
You have to know when yes really does mean no, or when yes means I think I can learn it,
Yeah.
but not necessarily I have the skill set right now.
Right. That's good intuition. Mike, any thoughts? Same line of thought.
I see the same thing in India. They are very willing, or they want to ensure they're always pleasing to the client.
Right.
So we definitely have to sit down and have a discussion. I wouldn't call it an interrogation, but it's definitely sitting down and talking about the deliverables, when we need them, what we need, have them repeat it back and understand us. As far as the education of the site, the guys I have on the site maintaining it, majority of those individuals came out of college or came out of the military, but as you work your way down to the entry-level guys, they probably have a high school education, not much background, and I put a lot of dependence on the guys up at the top level to make sure everything's working correctly.
How important is it to have kind of in-country experience, experienced team members, architects, owners representation? What's your thoughts on?
So I definitely put a lot of emphasis on having somebody in the country. We sent out a bid. We sat down with 3 architect firms, 3 engineering firms from India. We had that discussion. We interviewed each one before we made that selection. We wanted somebody who knew the culture, knew the language, knew how contractors worked,
Right.
so they could provide a good feedback to us as part of their service package.
Good. Steve, any thoughts?
Let me approach it from a service provider or, design build firm. Worked for 2 in my previous employers, in previous jobs. You cannot move, especially into Asia, and it's that way everywhere, but you cannot move into Asia without local people on the ground. If you don't have them yourself, you have to partner with someone,
Right.
some way of people who know people inside that, and of course it's the same way anywhere in the world, but even more so even in Asia that we see in other parts of the world many times. Used to work for EYP Mission Critical Facilities and made a very large inroad into China several years ago, and the attempt is just to have 1 or 2 persons, just from a lessons learned point of view, 1 or 2 persons going in and just making contacts and working through that. And until we were actually able to hire people on the ground that actually came from that culture, native to that culture, there was no way to succeed with that. Again, going back to a comment that I made earlier, is they're more than willing to listen to our experience and expertise, but they want to talk to somebody from their own world day in and day out. So being able to look them at face to face, whether that's using obviously subs in the country. So absolutely in every one of these countries, the expertise can be coming from outside, from the design side, but the people they want to deal with day in and day out has to be from their culture inside that. And then there's the nuances, and without getting any type of political indications, it's like you have to be very careful about the cultures because there's a very, very strong culture distance. Obviously, Japanese and Chinese don't get along with each other, but even inside of like the ASEAN countries, there's just some areas you just don't want to. You have to be very, very careful and be very culturally aware of all the different histories of that background, and it can lead to some interesting moments. Some of the interesting things we noticed is sometimes they're more tolerant of maybe certain cultures like the French people or whatever. So you have to really know who you're working with when if you're looking to move in those areas, are already in the process for that.
So Steve, that kind of segues into governmental relations, your interface with those projects. You want to maybe kind of continue that vein of thought?
Sure. We've done a lot of work in Brazil as well as Russia and Asia. Comments before, absolutely agree with, I think it was the last panel session. Brazil really has tariffs in place to try to keep you from bringing in outside equipment, buy Brazil first.
Right.
Some of the Asian countries, again, it depends country by country, are that way as well. Specifically in Russia, it's many of the companies in Russia are owned significantly by the Russian government itself. It's still left over from a socialist company, or either have very, very strong indications in control from what happens from a land point of view. Things like inside of Moscow itself was interesting. People still really don't own land inside of Moscow. It's still more or less owned by the state, and it has the right to do so, do as they wish. So when you want to do projects, it's even more so, much more so than even in the U.S. You have to consider that in the U.S. as well, of course, about government approvals. Knowing the right people can be the difference between getting a project off the ground or not. Even in a European, done quite a bit of work in Germany. In the people who actually are there and building data centers in Germany day in, day out, you said all of these projects are decided. They have these clubs for the families that actually control Germany. And so when these projects go out, actually they're all decided inside of their own the gentlemen's clubs they go to for behind the scenes. And they'll tell you behind the scenes, that's what happens. That's where it happens. And if you're not inside that society, you're not going to get a major data center project inside it. And that's Germany, a democratic society. So it's just as much or more so in the cultures of Asia. It's working here recently, also in Bangkok, in Thailand, very much so the same way. As you have to incorporate knowledge of the government as well, and probably have to have people inside of the government as well as the industry itself.
Matt, any thoughts on any permitting challenges, AHJ challenges?
Yeah, it's all over the board depending on where you are. You look at China, where the people of China own all of the land and the government holds it in trust. So, as an individual, if I were a Chinese citizen, I couldn't own a specific piece of land. It's kind of understood that I own collectively part of the whole country and the government holds it in trust. And so if I want to work on a piece of land, I lease it from the government, and I can do a long-term lease if I'd like, but you never really own that project site. So you've got to work with the government on the land acquisition.
On the development side, really, if you will.
Obviously, the permitting, which can be a pretty lengthy approval process. The government owns all of the utilities there, so working with the government on all those. And then outside of the actual government itself, there's some quasi-governmental agencies, like we've worked a lot with TITA, which is a Tianjin Economic Development Agency, who actually has an office here in Dallas, Texas. But they do a lot of the economic incentive packages. So, if you want to go over there and build a data center, they may build the shell and work out a lease back with you and work on some financing structures. So there's lots of very specific governmental entities, and you need to know who to talk to and how to talk to that person, and you don't want to talk to this guy and give him a lot of face time. If another guy that's his boss, you should be talking to him, because that may ruin your whole strategy. Completely opposite of that is working in a place like Saudi Arabia, where there are very few people that control a lot of what goes on in the government. It's the royal family, and so that kind of trickles down a little bit to the representatives of the family and in the small jurisdictions where you're working. But the strategy of approaching each of those government or quasi-governmental agencies in each of these countries is very, very different. So one of the things we talked about before, having a local consultant or somebody that understands that and is a citizen is extremely helpful in navigating those waters.
So Mike, you're obviously on the end user side. How important is that to understand the durations of these periods so you can communicate that upstream to minimize the liars, if you will?
Right. First thing we do is Fidelity. When we head out to a different company or country, we hire a government liaison, somebody to work with us with government relationships to figure out what we need, how we need it, how long will it take, and who do we talk to. So we go ahead and try to take care of some of that on the front end. Once we sit down and start talking to these people, we make a decision on whether we want to go to these countries. And then we start working with the contractors, the architects, to figure out what do we need, where do we want to put it. With regard to the AHJs, once we get building, typically we never see AHJ until the building's ready to turn over. He comes in, he checks the fire protection, he makes sure the elevators are working properly, he gives us a certificate to move in. So during the fit out of the building, it's very rare we see AHJ. We pay our building permits, any other permits we need, and it's just move in when we're finished. With regard to tariffs, in India, we try to maintain a in-country equipment purchase.
Right.
Like I said, majority of the stuff we use is by well-known manufacturer, Cat, Liebert, somebody like that. We can get it within that country. Switchgear, I have not seen any American-made switchgear in our facilities, so we go with a local vendor of switchgear. Same thing with regard to lights or any of the control systems within that building.
Sounds good. Anybody have any questions regarding those topics? Everybody okay? Oh, I keep missing up. Yes, Chris.
What would you say is the single biggest obstacle to when doing business overseas and then if you build that and then maintaining that site?
Question.
I think one of the biggest hurdles that I've seen is setting up your business entity properly. If you're an American company or a European company or if any foreign company that wants to do business in another foreign country, figuring out how to properly set up that business entity is crucial. Take China, for example. As an American company, there are 3 ways that I can do business in China. There's a joint venture with a Chinese company. There's what's called a WFOE, which is a wholly foreign-owned enterprise. And then there's a different type of joint venture structure. The WFOE is the most difficult to get. It typically will take people about 3 years and a lot of money in legal fees, a lot of time, a lot of headaches and trips back and forth to get that. But it's generally people that do that will succeed more often, whereas a partnership, you're not allowed to own more than 49% of the company. And you have to have an in-country designee that owns 51% or more of the company. Generally, about 9 out of 10 of those will fail. It's a much easier path to get into the country, a much quicker path, but it's a lot harder on the back end. So, if you are a foreign company going in, figuring out that proper structure and doing your proper due diligence and investing in that on the front end certainly is the right way to go.
Also to add would be related to equipment. Definitely go with a local vendor, within that country. Because if you order a piece of equipment from the United States and ship it over, trying to find replacement parts, somebody to take care of it, it's going to be tough. So you need something that can be taken care of within that country by their local vendors using their local education and supply houses.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense. I think there was a couple questions. Go ahead.
This is a question for you, Matt. You mentioned the growth of China and the number of people and demand for data centers. What's been your experience there? How willing they are to adopt American standards versus developing and having their own in their designs?
It's kind of funny that the American standards when it comes to consumerism is very strong. So anybody, I would say mid-30s and younger, they've got an iPhone and an iPad and they want a car in the driveway and their own house and a mortgage and everything else, and they speak English, and there's a very sharp dividing line between them and the older generation that still has that saving culture and everybody lives together, and it's very interesting to see that dividing line. When it comes to design and construction and some of those requirements, a lot of what we're seeing on data centers, it's part of China's, what they call the GB code, which is kind of like our NFPA. You know, there's lots of different parts of that code. When it comes to data centers, there are a lot of legacy requirements that I would really like to see be changed. Some examples of that are, they have 3 classifications of data center, a Class A, B, and C. A Class A is akin to our Tier 4 data center. A B is similar to a Tier 3, and a C is similar to a Tier 1 or Tier 2. If you want to be either a Class A or a Class B data center, you can have a data hall that's no greater than 500 square meters. You have to have a gas discharge fire protection system. You have to have tie breakers at certain points in the electrical distribution system. You have to have at least 15 minutes of battery. There's a lot of legacy requirements that I think 10 or 15 years ago were appropriate for that class of a data center, but we're seeing those requirements evolve, you know, in a lot of different standards, that they're not evolving there. And so if you want to be certified, and in China, it's very crucial to get that certificate that says, I'm a Class A data center, or I'm a Class B data center. But in order to get that, you have to have some of these, you have to meet some of these legacy requirements.
Phil?
In some of these countries and some of the locales, there are a lot of different types of business ethics and business practices that would be acceptable for international trade law and by some of the laws here in the United States. So how do you work around those?
Man, it's tough. It really
Are we
is
being
tough.
recorded, Phil? Wait a minute.
I'll take that one, to start off with. Fidelity, we have a very strict and regimented code of ethics. And when we get into some of these countries, we may have to use an expediter to ensure the projects go smoothly. And as part of that, we have to sit down with our legal team and explain to them what's going on and ensure it's within the guidelines of our business code.
So we made a conscious decision a long time ago to not do anything to compromise the integrity of our company. I would rather see a project fail than by not paying graft or paying a bribe than to do it and be seen in that manner.
The reason I ask that is a lot of people that maybe have done international business just don't understand that's a common way of business.
It is, yeah. We've seen it being cleaned up a lot in a number of countries. Africa, we've done a lot of work in West Africa and throughout Asia. China's made some big strides in the last year. It still goes on, but it is starting to be cleaned up.
So just as an antidote to that, worked for a company who built a very large plant in China. This was a few years ago. Again, hopefully it's changed in the last year. That went fine, everything. The local politicians came into the plant after it was open and started going and said, there is this customary fee that you pay us just to make sure things are going on. And the very large company said, well, our ethics won't let us do that. And then about the next day, the power to the entire site went down. And, of course, they inquired, what happened to the power? They said, well, you know what, that fee that we talked about is part of that fee that makes sure your power stays on in that site. So, so then you have, it's already built, it's there. It's the local community, regional people have that power to do that kind of thing. So there, the question is what can you tolerate and what you cannot. Therefore, it's always very, very important to do the homework before you get into that situation. I can tell you another one. I will not give you the country, the company, but working with a very large 51% owned client in Moscow in Russia. This was just last year. And we get in the meetings with the guys, and they just point blank said, they were talking about how can we go over to these, how can we go in and sell services to these large enterprise companies in Russia? And they just look at you across the table. So you said the problem is we, as 51% owned by the government, we can't go in and pay bribes. He said the only way you get that business is it's who gives the biggest bribe to the people, the head of the companies, will get their business. And they said that's just the way it is. That's just the way it happens in Russia. So Again, that's not me, that's people living in that country. So does that mean that's the way it is everywhere in Russia? Of course not. I'm just saying, it was just stark that they were just saying, well, by the end of the day, that's exactly what happens. And we being a government company, we're not allowed to do that, where private companies will do that, internally inside of those countries. So it still exists, of course, out there.
And sometimes it's hard to know what is something that you should be paying versus something that's graft. I mean, there's a lot of people that set up shell companies, and if you're going in as an uneducated foreigner building in that country, it can be difficult to know, all right, I should be paying this fee and this fee over here.
Right.
Probably
Right, it's hard
I'm
to
being
know.
targeted to be paid.
Did that answer your question, Phil? Anybody? So I think we're running short on time, guys. The last topic we had was really power, availability, redundancy, what you guys are seeing in these markets. And Matt, you want to maybe lead off?
Yeah, it depends on the market. When I worked in India, one of the first things that they said to me when we built our data center there was, it's generally accepted that we lose UPS power once a week. And I said, oh, so the power that feeds your UPS goes down once a week? And they said, no, the power from our UPS goes down once a week. By contrast, when I first started working in China, I went in kind of with the expectation that their power grid was unstable and was very, very pleased to find out that that's not the case. Very few outages, very clean power.
Right.
But then, to contrast that, working in Dubai, not necessarily now, but you look at Dubai and Singapore during the last building boom that happened over there, and you could build a skyscraper and they can tell you, all right, you're going to have power, and that building could sit finished for 18 months before you got power and water.
Wow.
So you need to have a really good understanding that, yes, this is the day that I actually will be getting power to my site, and people have agreed to it, and the government have given their proper chops.
Super. Mike, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, in India, I have 2 sites in Bangalore. One site, I lose power at least once a week. The other site, I lose power at least once a day. Typically, it's 2 o'clock in the afternoon. It's only rolling brownout. So I have an N+1 generator system, 2N UPS system going out to the floor, change my batteries out once every 3 years. It's just,
That's the way it is.
it's just the way it is.
Right.
Well, you say we're running pretty close on time here, or?
All right.
Well, one of the things I did want to share, and again, just sharing some information from our research part of the world, which Rick is part of our company here, so I was looking over at him, is you might say, well, why in the world do you want to take on some of these problems, issues? So, again, we're doing business in over 60 countries around the world, and we track almost every economy and data centers all over the world, so and what's going on. So just to give you, on a compound annual growth rate, the Asia part of the world will grow at 4 times the rate of the United States between now and 2017. And so we're talking about 0.9% compound annual growth rate. It's closer to 4% average over the next, between now and 2017. The Mideast and EMEA, but mostly the Mideast, will grow at 3 times the rate in the United States. What does that mean? What does that mean from, we're talking about just in the Asian market, the hosting site, or actually really the data center services world, in 2011 was about an $834 million a year business. By 2017, it'll be over $3.2 billion. I mean, so we're talking about huge amounts of growth compared to North America. As far as the total goes, it still will be close to, maybe behind what the North America total is. But the North America and Europe markets are very mature, well built out markets. The explosive growths are all happening in the Mideast, in Asia, as we know. But I wanted to put some actual figures to that. So, out of that, when we're talking about hosting type services, the Asian market is extremely open, and actually more than 50% of all data center space in the Asian market is a third-party space. So there are people building data centers for their own people like the Fidelities of the world. The majority of the companies in those regions are looking to third-party hosting type solution providers. And Rick, if I miss this, please, Rick actually is out of that practice area. So got somebody, just to give you some idea, currently about 56% of the companies inside of Asia are looking to not use third-party hosting. When we're talking about, you know, a wholesale data center, multi-tenant data center, cloud, public cloud, those type of things. In the next 2 years, it's going to actually change, and 55% of all data centers built in Asia people will be looking to consume third-party spaces. So it's actually a growth is both in owned and operated data centers, but we absolutely believe in the next 2 years it'll be a flip to consuming of more of third-party services. So today, you know, as a breakout of that really quickly, out of that, about 53% of those managed third-party hostings, about 53% of that is colo, about 21% is public cloud, and about 26% private cloud. In 2 years, that's going to be that 53% of co-location or multi-tenant data center space will go down to about 45% is what we're projecting. Public cloud, a little bit of uptick of about 3% to 24%, but private cloud is 31%. And by the way, all the way across the world, we see a very, very strong drive for private cloud type of IT infrastructures going in these new data centers. So a very, very strong driver of growth. And again, just to recap, you know, 4 times what we're seeing. Good thing is we're going to continue to see growth in North America, but 4 times the amount of growth. Just huge amounts of growth in Asia, and about 3 times in the Mideast. Some in Europe, but Europe is actually one of the slowest growing regions of the world right now.
So Steve, what's challenging, it's a market we can't not pay attention to.
It's huge, and
That's
it's
where the
not
growth
slowing
is,
down. It's not slowing down at all
Right.
in Asia.
Fair enough.
So.
Well, I think we're at time. If there's one question, we'll close it up otherwise.
Well, we're going to take a break at this point, and then we'll have the last 2 presentations of the day. So actually, if you want to come up and bump for a couple of questions during the break, I'd say let's go ahead and pick
Sounds good. Thank you.